Okay, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, once more, dear colleagues, dear friends, so we can continue already to more focus on some particular aspects, and I think we had the two great panels today, and I think we had quite great lunch as well, so we can continue also with more food for thought as well here in already the more focused breakout sessions. And this is, of course, devoted on Eastern Partnership, on neighborhood, on democratization, human rights, since the panel goes also under the agenda of Sakarov's name, and the human rights democratization, I think, are very important aspects to mention in this regard. This is I think I'm repeating those phrases, but I think this is, of course, always important time for the Eastern Partnership and very timely debate, because still the events, unfortunately, dramatic events in Ukraine continue, and of course, the daily politics of engagement, what we could see, have been replaced by wider geopolitical challenges, and this is also about the hope of stabilizing our Eastern partners, our Eastern neighbors, above all Ukraine, and sort of having Ukraine as a stable partner in the East, in our neighborhood. It's about elections in those countries. Ukraine seems to be done some homeworks, and some progress have been already visible. Georgia had some elections in spring, the local elections, of course. There are also some challenges, what continues with some government reshuffles. Moldova just had elections last weekend. The pro-European parties have won, but, well, let's not be naive. There are a lot of tasks ahead, and I think this winter will be, to some extent, interesting for the Eastern partners, for those particular countries, and of course for all us, because we are interested to have the stable neighborhood. We've signed association agreements with 3 countries, but this is again more a tool and instrument rather than a goal in itself. So there are the wider issues. What's next? Can we speak about prospects of membership? Should we speak about prospect of membership? And I know these will be the questions also here around the table. And Juris Poikāns has already used to replying to those on a regular basis, I guess. And what's the Latvian position? But of course, additionally, already I'm leading to additional aspect is that we are the EU presiding country, and this has been one of the prerogatives, privileges of the young members of European Union to promote this agenda, be it Czech Republic, be it Poland, be it Lithuania, or now it is time for Latvia as well. And of course, there are issues and questions. What's next after Riga summit? Is it the last one, or there is some continuation to all of this? This panel is, as I am willing always to repeat, a joint effort. The European Parliament Information Office has been willing to provide also the generous support to organizing this panel, and as I said, also the auspices of Sakarov's vision of European and human rights values, and I think Marta Rībele will be able to develop and expand a little bit more on this. And these are the very important parts of our engagement with Eastern partners, because it's not just about some kind of economic engagement and technical engagement, it's also on a, you can say, civilizational engagement as well, and human rights is a very important part in all of this. So I stop here. We have an excellent panel of distinguished speakers to address those issues, and well, there is a panel on a screen which is a little bit different from the program. So actually I will stick to the program, not to the screen. And in this context, I am happy to give the floor to Linas Kojala, who is replacing Kristina Vaičūnaite. I'm contradicting a little bit with myself, because I'm sticking to the program. There is some change already made. Linas, I would like to start with you because Lithuania was active promoter of Eastern Partnership. I was myself participating last November in a civil society conference in Vilnius. There were a lot of hopes also about Ukraine. So 1 year has changed a lot. So how you see what has changed since Vilnius? So how you look what were contributions of Lithuanian presidency as well? And I would ask kindly my colleagues stick to 7 minutes rule and to be short so that we can engage already later on in lively discussion as well. Please, Linas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with Broliukas in Latvia. We have experience of Eastern Partnership Summit of last year, and now we move on to Riga. It's good that we have some continuation. But from Lithuanian point of view, we see that Eastern Partnership is at the crossroads. Obviously, in Vilnius Summit, we had a clear target of signing association agreement with Ukraine, also with Moldova and Georgia, initiating them. But now it's not that clear where European Union should go and what it should do with its Eastern partners. And bold decisions, I have to say, have to be made in Riga, because it's the first summit after the game changer in Ukraine, which is ongoing to this moment. But I think that Riga summit will draw some clear lines on or ideas on where it might go for the future. And I will just be short and present three possible scenarios of Eastern Partnership policy as we see it in Lithuania, in Eastern Europe Study Center, and I would say in Lithuania as a whole. Three possible scenarios. We should not maybe emphasize that any of these scenarios must be followed by 100%. There may be some mixes, but just to draw some ideas on what possibilities are lying for the future. So the first scenario is the most negative scenario from our point of view, is the retreat of Eastern Partnership policy, which would mean that the European Union would take up responsibility for what is happening in Ukraine to some part, because we see some examples of analyzers who say that Europe was too active. Europe was too active engaging with the Eastern partners. It was too active trying to democratize those countries, and it was moving to the Russian sphere of influence. So one possibility is to move back, to focus on pragmatic issues with Russia, on energy and economy, to maybe discuss some ideas such as free market zone between Lisbon and Vladivostok, which was promoted by Putin for some years and now. And that would probably prove that Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and other countries have only a limited sovereignty, that their decisions does not matter after all to 100%, because it's the big powers who decide whose sphere of influence the region is. The second scenario, which is a middle scenario, would sound something like a muddling through. And that would probably mean that current difficult conditions would be continued for a long time, because there would probably be no bold initiatives or proposals at Riga Summit how to continue with Eastern Partnership policy, as there would be no consensus among European Union countries. And one example of that, to some extent, could be the delayed implementation of some part of association agreement with Ukraine, which seemed to be suiting for at least 3 actors in some sense, because for Russia it proves that it has influence in the region and it can stop the bilateral negotiations between European Union and Eastern Partnership countries. For Ukraine also it's to some extent okay, because the delayed implementation of norms and regulations of European Union, and also to the businesses of Ukraine and oligarchic interests of Ukraine is also good, because the markets of European Union are being opened up for them, but the competition in the domestic Ukrainian market will be delayed. I mean that the production of European products will not be that competitive in the Ukrainian market for at least a year more. So that would be a muddling through without any big initiatives, just moving like it is now and hoping for bigger and better decisions when the situation stabilizes, in Ukraine at least. And the third, which is the most optimistic in our point of view, or a target of Lithuania, and I think Latvians too, is new incentives for reform of Eastern Partnership policy. The problem is that we see lack of incentives for Eastern Partnership countries, especially those who signed the association agreement, to implement the reforms that are needed to fulfill European regulations or criteria, because those countries have to adapt some say 70 or even 90% of European Union acquis, which means a lot of costly reforms, but they do not see a clear perspective of membership in the European Union as an incentive, which was very successful when Lithuania, Latvia, and other Eastern European countries joined the European Union some time ago already. So the light of the end of the tunnel, membership perspective would be needed. And unfortunately, it seems to be unlikely that at this moment of time, European Union could agree on membership perspective, especially when the situation in Ukraine is not stable. So Riga summit could start, or at least try to start, some new ideas or policies which would move to the same direction, but would maybe put membership perspective a little bit further away. And one of that could be a perspective of membership perspective, as we thought, which would not be a new policy as itself, but still it would offer some new opportunities, because it would mean that a clear roadmap of reforms for each of the countries, a different roadmap, which is an part of the association agreement, would be drawn to each of these countries with specific time, 3 to 5 years with evaluation. And when those countries are successful in implementing some structural reforms in law, justice, democracy sectors, then they would be given a membership perspective to join European Union maybe in the future. That would be just a one step further for them to make some reforms, because European Union would not need to commit itself to a membership perspective at this moment of time, and it's more difficult, and it would put the ball in the hands of the Eastern Partnership countries, saying that you must do reforms, you must show the results, and then if you're successful with a clear roadmap of what you have to do, then we will give the membership perspective. And I think it's essential, because we've seen, I think that most of the people have seen on TV or even being in Ukraine, that people in Ukraine died with European Union flags in their hands. And European Union must not leave them behind. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Linas. I'm still tempted to ask a question which is, again, sound a little bit more geopolitical rather than going into the trifles and details of Eastern Partnership. I think excellent. You provide already some vision how we can continue. But coming back to Lithuanian presidency, would you say that there was some additional pressure from Russia because Lithuania was willing to promote Eastern Partnership agenda? Would you say also Latvia might expect something like this because we are willing to promote Eastern Partnership agenda? How we would look at this angle, sort of geopolitical angle, and Russia's factor in all of this as well?
Absolutely. I think that Latvians should expect additional pressure, even though it's a constant pressure from Russia in spite of presidency or without it. We've seen that before Vilnius, 3-4 months before the summit, as we talked that it's Eastern Partnership and the summit is our priority, that Ukraine is our priority. We've seen the embargo of some of our products going to Russia. We've seen very active informational campaigns in Lithuania, in media, saying that, making many issues, putting them up on the agenda and trying to distract us from the Eastern Partnership. There was also one scandal when our diplomats were talking on the phone, and that was put up on the YouTube, and it was obviously a job done by some security agencies, and it was a big distraction just before the Eastern Partnership Summit. And I think that as Latvia has similar priorities, and as Latvia is very active in this region, we could expect that these policies would be repeated or even more renewed for Latvia.
Thank you, Linas. Of course, sometimes we like to use the Russian argument as some kind of explanation for some of our shortcomings, in a sense. And I remember just a little bit on the humorous side that during the civil society conference, 3 or 4 mics were not functioning. And Russian suitcase was blamed for blocking the signal to coming to the mics. But anyway, I think the lesson is what you said, that we should watch our own words, what we speak on the phone. So some things might be used in the process. Anyway, so I must proceed to Doris Wydra from Salzburg Center of European Union Studies from Austria, and I think it's also very interesting to see not just as we discuss here in the region, Baltics, Latvians, Lithuanians, but also how it looks from the wider European perspective, what's going on in the neighborhood, what's going in Eastern Partnership, what can be done. Please, okay. Doris, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think I need this mic. Yes, please. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here and to listen to all these discussions that are going on and to get also the perspective of the Baltic states, especially on the Eastern Partnership. I would like to talk more generally about the normative power Europe, as it has always been called also in the partnership, and how it is a little bit now catched in a struggle between realpolitik, you can say, so what is the realist world outside, and the normative power, what Europe tends to be or wants to be. So what we see is that the normative power of Europe is increasingly in challenge, and especially in its neighborhood. The results of the European neighborhood policy since its creation in 2004 have been quite limited. Some have even said the European neighborhood, in fact, is dead. In 2004, when the European neighborhood was created, we had a relatively stable area around Europe, but what we now see 10 years later is that it's an arena even for violent conflicts in the south and the east, and of course the Ukrainian case is especially tragic, especially for me, having worked in Ukraine and in Russia and having had the chance to see both sides. A number of studies, and we have already heard it, pointed to the fact that the European neighborhood is only limited effective, that conditionality does not work in the neighborhood like it worked as a mechanism of enlargement. Without the perspective of membership, the adaptation costs are too high. We have weak state structures in the states. We have high levels of corruption and, of course, also interdependence. And we see this, of course, especially in the Eastern Partnership, structural, institutional, economic and geopolitical interdependence with other powers in the region. So when the European neighborhood was designed, it also relied on the premise that the Russian Federation itself would probably increasingly turn towards European norms and values and would thus become a real strategic partner in the region. There were even hopes that Russia could be Europeanized in a way through the cooperation in the four common areas and the partnership for modernization. The events in Ukraine have clearly shown that this is not the case. In his speech at the Valdai Discussion Club in Sochi in autumn this year, Putin addressed the question of new rules or game without rules. And in his presentation, he reproached the US and also the European Union for not being willing to negotiate new rules based on the absolute respect of state sovereignty as core principle, as they declared, as he regards it, themselves as the winners of the Cold War and imposed legal nihilism by imposing their own universal recipes, justifying illegal intervention or the toppling of inconvenient regimes by referring to common values and the threat to democracy. And there's also another article that evoked a lot of academic discussion, which was an article by Mersheimer in a recent article in Foreign Affairs, where he speaks about the liberal delusion that provoked Putin. And he alleges the US and the European Union of having tended to believe that the logic of realism holds little relevance for the 21st century, and that Europe can be kept whole and free on the basis of such liberal principles as the rule of law, economic interdependence, and democracy. For him, the crisis shows that realpolitik remains relevant, and the European leaders blundered in attempting to turn Ukraine into a Western state. So the question is, has the EU to turn into a more realist power, stepping up its security agenda and playing the power game? And it is also the question how the European Union can address the politics of coercion that has been developed and applied by Russia. One issue that has already been mentioned today is a new security strategy. The key threats that were mentioned in the European security strategy in 2003 are more than ever present in the immediate neighborhood, especially also in the eastern neighborhood. And already the review of the strategy in 2008 called for more strategic thinking and more visibility. This remains of crucial importance for the European Union because to be an anchor of stability, the European Union has to assist neighboring countries to overcome weak structures, fight corruption, and strengthen the rule of law. Because this introduces more stability and also strengthens the basis for economic development in the neighborhood. And I think the UN mission to Ukraine, which has been decided upon, is a good case and a good example for this. But developing common strategy also calls for more solidarity between the European member states in putting national interests aside when common interests are at stake. There was an interesting article in the Journal of Common Market Studies on the EU-Russian partnership in a changing world in 2013. It has been written by the foreign minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov. And he stresses that attempts to restrain EU member states in their relation with Russia hampers the development of the strategic partnership, and the EU should invoke the principles of subsidiarity and proportionality more often in areas that fall not under its exclusive competence, as cooperation with single member states brings more effects than cooperating with the Union. So this is the clear trend of the Russian foreign policy. I think the sanctions now in place against Russia show that the European Union can speak with a single voice. And this is absolutely necessary to make a firm point that the European Union is standing behind the rules that confirm that the sovereignty of weaker states cannot be infringed by powerful states, and that sovereignty implies the duty to respect international law, human rights, and democracy. Another point of strategic thinking, I think it's absolutely necessary to carefully assess the economic and political developments of the neighboring countries and plan ahead for possible scenarios that might develop, because it has been assessed in the strategy paper on Ukraine already in the strategy paper 2002 to 2006 that Ukraine has successfully managed to overcome the crisis in Crimea, and then speaking about the Crimean crisis of the 1990s. But now, with the experiences of the Orange Revolution that was regarded as being pro-European and threatening Russian interests in Ukraine, a minimalist autonomy on Crimea for the Russians, and also, of course, the deteriorating economic situation in the area. This all increased again the attractiveness of the Russian Federation. So the assessment in this paper was premature, and it alluded to a rather treacherous stability, and the European Union should be more careful about these assessments. Very shortly, two further points. The first thing is the EU should avoid to being considered as being an elite project in these countries. The criticism is often brought forward also internally, and rising levels of Euroscepticism internally highlight that also EU citizens increasingly do not see the benefits of EU membership. This has to be avoided in the neighborhood, and it has to be invested in making clear the benefits of further approximation to the European Union. Recent opinion polls in Ukraine, for instance, show that the European project has very high levels of support, even a considerable level of support in the east and in the south of the country. But when you discuss the issue of Europe with the people, then often doubts come up about the further possibilities for enlargement, whether there will be a membership perspective. Little is known about how the European Union actually functions and what benefits it actually brings to the everyday life of the normal citizens. And it is also referred to that the last round of enlargement in the European Union created a kind of second-class citizen in the European Union. Of course, there are doubts what then does a membership in the European Union really bring. And my last point is that minority protection is of crucial importance in these regions because the annexation of Crimea, for instance, has hit one minority especially hard, and these are the Crimean Tatars. They fiercely opposed the referendum. They repeatedly declared their loyalty with the Ukrainian state. And what we are now seeing in Crimea is that there's a new wave of oppression against the Crimean Tatars, that their political leaders are labeled as extremists and banned from returning to Crimea. And here I think it is of crucial importance that European institutions do not look away from what is going on in these regions. And another point I want to stress, it is absolutely necessary that there's cooperation with other institutions on this matter, like the Council of the European Union, because only this can provide a comprehensive answer to the human rights challenges in the European neighborhood. So, Europe's strength are its value. Its interest is to build a stable, democratic and economically prosperous environment, guided by the rule of law and the respect for minorities. And these are no liberal delusions, but a different concept of sovereignty than Russia would like to see. But it has to be stressed that also a normative power has to be strategic.
Excellent. Thank you for the, I think, very comprehensive overview on the different aspects in this general picture, sort of, both starting from geopolitics, finishing with our own strengths and what we can do and what we can project. But I come back to geopolitics, and I hope I will do a little bit different direction with my Latvian colleagues. But still, I'm very happy to hear our foreign guest perceptions on this. Because you mentioned as well annexation of Crimea. This is basically, for some it is revenge of geopolitics. For some it is geopolitics of resentful, that there are some countries which were resentful of what happened after the breakup of Soviet Union. Of course, first of all about Russia, and Mearsheimer's article you referred to very much pinpoints to this. But you coming from Austria, I think that in Austria there is, what I understand, a very strong feeling that still the door should be open, a dialogue with Russia should be open. And exactly, so my question is there a chance still for a win-win project in a neighborhood where everybody or everybody's expectations are in a sense satisfied? EU, Russia, Ukraine. Or are we unfortunately in some kind of zero-sum logic? Are we entrapped in a logic of escalation? How you would see this one? Are there still some optimistic scenarios possible?
Well, actually, I'm always optimistic, and I think also when you see how, especially Austrian politics, I mean, it has also been reproached for, because in Austria and Germany you have a constant reproach also of those that speak of we have to bring Russia back in and we have to keep Russia on the table. We do have to refrain from any actions that could provoke Russia any further. It is also often called in German, it's Russlandversteher, so those who understand Russians. And this is sometimes uttered in a rather critical voice. But I think the only way forward for the continent is to keep communication open. This is quite difficult at the moment. I think we have a lot also of misperceptions on both sides, and these misperceptions got very clear to me at the Salzburg University. We have a Austrian-Russian summer school, and we also held it this year, which is about EU-Russia relations. And having the Russian students here, so this attracts mainly students from the Russian Federation, and discussing all the problems, you see that there is a complete different perception of international norms. But if you start talking with each other, also going away from the media discourse that at the moment is a real problem. It is a real problem in Russia. What is transported through the media, but also what is in the European media is sometimes a perception of Russia that is not fully true. So I think the way forward is to be very, very open for all windows of opportunity for communication, for finding solutions, and I think for a partner like Russia, this is a real crucial issue, not letting Russia lose its face. So we have to find solutions to make Russian concession possible without making it look weak again, because this is something that Putin repeatedly stresses, that Russia will never again take the weak role. And this is being respectful, being open, and keeping the doors for communication open. But it's difficult at the moment.
Excellent, thank you. And here I am happy to give the floor to Juris Poikāns, who is Latvian ambassador for Eastern Partnership, also ambassador to Moldova, so one of the Eastern Partnership countries. Juris, I think you're doing a great job already for some time, and projecting our interests and doing it in an excellent way. But we have a lot of difficulties and challenges we are sort of facing, and I think one of our difficult tasks, how to balance between those things of geopolitics, that none of the sides should lose face, actually Russia and the EU as well. Then we still have a lot of challenges in the neighborhood and all those structural reforms, and it doesn't go so easily. And Moldova elections pinpoint also to a lot of difficulties and challenges ahead of the country. Then we still have to also arrive at some European common voice, what we discussed in the previous panel. So basically you have mission impossible. What Latvia can do is this, what is this mission possible in this context?
I think still the mission is possible, actually, because you are right in pointing out to these difficulties the Latvian presidency is facing, but I would say I believe every country which would assume presidency now in the field of the Eastern Partnership would face the same difficulties. Yes, you're absolutely correct that we see quite fragile states, all 6 of them at the end of the day. And specifically looking at the Moldova's parliamentary elections, yes, it is still 50-50, and while the European forces had a small majority, but you have a very big part of society who is looking to different aims and different idols. And at the same time, if you look from the EU perspective, we have always told, in general, this is our success case. We granted visa-free regime to Moldova. We had the association agreement signed, but still the population of Moldova in general doesn't feel these benefits. So from my point of view, we must have a lot of patience when it comes to our Eastern partners. And I think these reforms, which have been mentioned here, specifically the capacity and willingness to carry out reforms, will be much lower than either in the Baltics or some other countries which joined the European Union in the past. And I think the key about the Eastern Partnership, if we are willing to see the results, we will see them only in some kind of medium perspective. We signed 3 association agreements with Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine. And these agreements, in theory, and I hope in practice, should transform these societies, should transform their economies to make ordinary lives better. But for that, really, you will need to carry out reforms, and it might take for many years. At the same time, I'm also pretty convinced the European Union will need to do more. And when I think about doing more, we will need to assist these countries more than we did it in the past. Why to assist more? I think we will also serve European interests. We will serve European interests because we want to create a zone of stability and prosperity. If we want to see any prosperity in Moldova, so it means we will need to act more. And sometimes when I see Moldova is today #1 receiver per capita of development assistance, but you don't see changes on the ground, we will need to bring experts to the countries, we will need more conditionality, we will need to work more with the Moldovan government to produce some concrete results. I don't want to see next parliamentary elections in Moldova after 4 years, again, battle for geopolitical choice, and I believe no one wants. I think, and the same is actually true for Ukraine and Georgia. So all in all, I think the success of our presidency will depend, and in general the success of the Eastern Partnership will depend, first and foremost, how effective we will be able to assist these countries in implementing association agreements. The second big issue for our presidency is not to lose sight of the rest three, trying to find an individual model of relations. So this is what we can achieve, I think, for the Latvian presidency. We must look for ways how to engage Armenia, how to engage Azerbaijan, how to engage Belarus at the end of the day. When you ask this question about values and geopolitics, I believe let's be realistic. Naturally, human rights play a very important role in the domestic life of EU member countries. And every candidate country which wants to join the European Union, and in this case, for example, Moldova and Ukraine, they will need to observe the highest possible standards in the field of human rights. But not all Eastern partners are the same. So if we pay attention only to the question of values, then how we deal with Azerbaijan as a country which is strategically important for energy supplies, how we deal with Belarus, which is bordering three European EU member states. So I think we must stick to the principle of human rights, but at the same time looking also for ways how to engage with these countries and trying to look for some joint interests. So I believe we must strike a delicate balancing between both values and interests. If one of them starts to dominate too much, I believe we will fail anyway at the end of the day. Yes, you are absolutely correct. You mentioned about building consensus within the European Union. I wouldn't be so pessimistic about that. Yes, we will never be able to look at the Eastern Partnership from the same angle. The same like I believe Latvia will never be able to grasp those challenges which sometimes are met by Greece, Italy, and Spain, because our geography is different, our history is different. I think what is very important for the European Union to have, again, a balanced, ambitious policy towards both directions, East and the South. If we want to achieve understanding from Southern European states, we will need to pay more attention to what's happening in Southern neighborhood and expecting that they will pay more attention to what's happening in the Eastern neighborhood. As a result, I think this building consensus, what I find traveling around EU capitals is very, very interesting. And I have a lot of interesting discussions in France, in Spain, in Italy. As a result, I think at the same time, yes, the Eastern Partnership is a policy which should be agreed upon 28 member states. So when we are sometimes too critical that we look more strategically oriented or less strategically oriented, we must always remember that these perceptions differ. And this building of this consensus, really having the policy which is shared by all 28, this will be, again, not the task only of the Latvian presidency, but in general all other presidencies. Maybe one comment on Russia. I agree with my Austrian colleague who is speaking about the need to keep doors open. My Dutch colleague, Ambassador for the Eastern Partnership, Dirk-Jan Kop, is always saying that we are sharing the same small European continent. So physically, we are anyway situated on the same continent, and we have trade, we have cultural, we have educational links. So it means, regardless of what has happened, and very open breach of international law, naturally, what has happened, we will need to have some kind of working and practical relations with Russia anyway. So at this moment, this relation will be different. And I think the key, what we always must remember about when engaging with Russia, when we look at the Eastern Partnership, I think the key issue is, my Lithuanian colleague already mentioned it here, this is free and sovereign policy choices by Eastern partners made. I think the European Union never entered into any geopolitical contest with Russia. When Armenia and Belarus decided to become a part of the Eurasian Economic Union, we maybe didn't welcome it, but we definitely didn't object. So if Armenia and Belarus want to have this type of relations with Russia, but at the same time Moldova, Ukraine and Georgia want to have a different type of relations with the European Union, I think we should respond to those needs and interests. So any engagement with Russia anyway should be based on the free and sovereign policy choices of the countries of the Eastern Partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, Juris. Very powerful as usual, very vocal. And you know, we've already been sitting with you a number of times at the table, and I've been asking some of the questions. I always try to play a little bit as a moderator, the devil's advocate, but I know that it's more and more difficult to somehow surprise you with my questions. But I will do my best again. You mentioned about engaging all 6 countries. Should Mr. Lukashenko be invited to Riga summit?
I think we shouldn't exclude the possibility of inviting Mr. Lukashenko to Riga summit. Because if we invite Mr. Ilham Aliyev to Riga summit, I don't believe why we cannot invite Mr. Lukashenko. I think the key is, this is the time and the window of opportunity for engaging with Belarus. But one thing is again very clear. Belarus needs to carry out some reforms, specifically in the field of human rights. The release of 4 political prisoners, I believe, is an absolute minimum of starting any kind of dialogue, whether we want to invite or not invite Mr. Lukashenko. But I think the Eastern Partnership has always been about all 6 states, and it's clear that Belarusian EU dialogue has always been very, very complicated. But I think many times on the European forum, I think we have asked this question, why is the situation in Azerbaijan in the field of human rights is so much better than in Belarus? And then no one has a very good answer. Why is it so? I believe it's more about the personality of Mr. Lukashenko and his personal remarks sometimes towards European leaders. But I think we shouldn't exclude any country from the Eastern Partnership, regardless how they are developing. But, as I mentioned at the very beginning, Mr. Lukashenko must demonstrate visible and tangible progress when it comes to the questions of human rights. I don't believe that Belarus might become a full-fledged democracy within a half a year, but I think if there is a good beginning, if there are prospects at least for the beginning, and if there is some tangible progress, I think we shouldn't exclude this possibility.
Juris, so I take it as a yes, he will be invited.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's yes, but it's yes with preconditions.
Okay, excellent. Thanks. Let's go on to Irina Kuzņecova, who is Foundation for Open Society representative DOTS Latvia. Irina, you've been already for a long time in the civil society dimension and following things and frequently going to those countries. Juris mentioned about patience, what EU should have with regard to those countries. But the question is, for me, immediately a little bit struck my back of my mind, my head, but do those countries, do societies of those countries will have actually patience to wait for those benefits? Because there is no prospect of membership. At the moment, it seems there are structural reforms with a lot of actually cost, including human cost. So how you would look at this one? What about the patience? What about civil society? Is civil society actually driving force behind the Europeanization efforts, or actually vice versa? At some moment, it might become a burden because some of the civil society segments might resist having more and more difficult structural reforms within the country. Please, Irina.
Thank you, Andris. I will be speaking not as a researcher, Andris told, more as a civil society activist, because we have so many experts and practitioners here, and I will be speaking as an activist, although with the in-depth knowledge of the region, indeed. And yesterday night I was preparing my key points for the presentation, and I was just asking myself the basic question: why we invest so much energy, resources, human, financial resources in our neighborhood? Why it's so really important? And then I was looking through all these documents, starting from 2003, and open letters from the founding fathers, etc. And then I made the key 3 points why it's so important for us, for the EU, not so much for neighbors. At first, because partners, European partners, want to be closer, want to cooperate with us, or want to be part of the EU, of our family. Nobody is really forced them to cooperate more closely with the EU. Second, just think about security. Advancing EU security interests based on our core values, and this is a document adopted 11 years ago, European security strategy. And the third, that's more imperative, and this comes from the principles laid out by the founding fathers of the Eastern Partnership, Karl Bildt and Radek Sikorski. It's like Europe without dividing lines. Eastern Partnership is based on a community of values, including democracy, human rights, and rule of law. And this is so much shared by the people, and not so much, unfortunately, by the leadership of the Eastern Partnership countries. And all these 3 points correlate or kind of underpin what I've been doing for the last 9 years, I would say so. And I remember 9 years ago, in 2006, me and my friends, we set up Community of Democratic Choice Youth Forum. Maybe some of you heard about the Community of Democratic Choice set up at this intergovernmental platform set up by late then presidents of Ukraine and Georgia, Yushchenko and Saakashvili. That was the forum where we promoted dialogue between youth, the EU, and Eastern Partnership. Back then, there was no Eastern Partnership. We really believed in democracy and rule of law and human rights. But again, that was a just private initiative with no support, because we realized that there is no structure, there is no regional identity. We were just gathering in Tallinn, in Tbilisi, in London even, because, to promote the ideas and values together with our friends from Ukraine, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and also Russia. And then why I'm speaking about that, because the Eastern Partnership creates a certain structure and regional identity. Recently I came across, there is lots of critique that Eastern Partnership is not delivering. Eastern Partnership is dead. And we criticize a lot, but we tend to ignore the opportunities and benefits the whole policy really brought to our societies. We measure the success by the agreements we concluded, not by the networks we created. One more moment from my personal experience showing that the Eastern Partnership really changed a lot. In 2007, remember, I was sitting in the cabinet of David Bakradze. Back then, he was chairing the European Integration Commission in the Parliament of Georgia. I was writing my bachelor thesis, and I was asking him, what's your assessment of the cooperation between the European Commission, the European Union, and Georgia? And then he was sitting, thinking, and then, oh, Irina, do you see a poster the European Commission sent to us? That was kind of a joke, but back then, if you compare the level of cooperation within the region itself, the Eastern Partnership, and the EU, there is a huge leap forward. Therefore, we shouldn't underestimate the tools we created and this multilateral framework, because even Eastern Partnership sometimes really failed, to deliver on some promises. Still, and there was a unified approach. We provided a standardized menu, not a la carte, and now I'm speaking that we should provide this a la carte, different bilateral approaches, but still there should be a unifying value framework where actually we are not just speaking EU, civil society, and politicians and civil servants with our partners from the East, but they can speak in network among ourselves, so this creates this regional identity, which for me is really important. Second point about the human rights and our interests, and 1 minute, oh gosh. Yeah, my point is that we should really avoid double standards. If Ilham Aliyev is invited to Riga, why not to invite Alexander Lukashenko? I was always struggling, why we have sanctions against Belarus? Why don't we have sanctions against Armenian leadership, Azerbaijani prisons? Currently we have 100 political prisons in Azerbaijan, but we're still pursuing our dialogue on the Strategic Modernization Pact, but we should really condition this signing of this pact that the real situation in terms of human rights will improve in Azerbaijan. And my last point, Andris, please allow me 1 more minute, which is really important for me. It's security, which is also important for civil society. It's my real pain that all the time we react post factum. When the conflict arrived, then we do something post factum, not in advance. And we should, none of the EU countries will be stable unless there are boiling conflicts. And now all of the Eastern Partnership countries, they have their own boiling, not frozen conflicts, including Armenia and Azerbaijan, because it could boil over. And my last remark, yeah, but this is a kind of a message to all of us. EU is seen as a power of attraction, not because of the level of prosperity we enjoy, because the values we share, and we should cherish these values at home and abroad. That's my message. Thank you.
Thank you, Irina. Thank you for your passionate presentation. I think we can feel your own experiences in all of this, and I think absolutely this is delightful to have your perspective on this. But I'm sorry I'm coming back to this Riga summit, and I know that but this is quite concrete thing, and I just want to clarify because you touch also on Azerbaijan and Mr. Aliyev. So what would you say? Should we invite all the people and regardless, or still really we should be very cautious whom we invite and who is present in Eastern Partnership Summit? Because of course in this case we to some extent also make a two-speed Eastern Partnership, and we invite somebody and we don't invite somebody else. What are criteria? So how you see it from civil society perspective?
I think we should invite everyone, but we should make it clear that we dislike or the crackdown of civil society in Azerbaijan. We should make it absolutely clear that this is our red line, because if we are not doing this, we are losing our partners, the trust of our partners and allies. Here I'm speaking the civil society of Azerbaijan, and this is also about Armenia and Belarus. We should invite everyone, but then make it clear that we are watching you and we will continue our cooperation, but still we are very determined.
Excellent, thanks. And with this we continue to Marta Rībele, who is the head of European Parliament Information Office in Latvia. They said we are happy to have you on the board, and we are happy also that you've been willing to contribute to this panel, because I think Sakarov's ideas and Sakarov's visions are still alive in a wider neighborhood, and we are still implementing them in many regards. So, but how you see is Sakarov's ideas actually alive, and are they still implementable, or there are a lot of challenges in the process? Please, Marta, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Andris. And well, to be very honest, I'm quite selfish concerning discussion, and you will see it at the end of my short speech. And actually, this has been a quite tough day for us, for the office, because actually this is today when we have the first very large visit of the European Union officials in Riga. So the European Parliament's President's Conference of Presidents is visiting Riga, and we will have the College of the Commission in the January. So, and the message, so I'm today coming as a messenger as well, and the Eastern Partnership, of course, was very, very important point also in debate between the Latvian government and the Conference of Presidents, and also in the press briefing with the Latvian Prime Minister and the President of the European Parliament. And there is a clear message that the European Parliament is very rational concerning this Riga summit, and of course will take part in organization of this event. But as Andris mentioned, of course, I come from an institution, and I'm very happy to hear from colleagues about the real situation, because I'm not there on the places where you have been, and but I originally come from the business, and I'm quite rational. So I would like to somehow, in a couple of minutes, to describe the tools, what we have for the human rights in general on the European Parliament's agenda and on EU's agenda in general. And of course, the first thing is Sakharov Prize. And even if sometimes it seems for us something very, very far, of course, this year the winner is the doctor from the Congo, who is doing a really amazing thing, who is helping women who suffer from the sexual violence. But this is a bit far from the Eastern Partnership, of course. But we have to take into account that among the three finalists, there were two Eastern Partnership activities, and one was the Euromaidan, and the second was Azerbaijan activists. But apart from this great project and inspiring speeches, and we have to understand how the Sakharov Prize functions in reality. But and to describe it, just two real cases where the persons who have received the Sakharov Prize have really benefited from that, not only themselves, but the general society of the Eastern Partnership countries have benefited. And for example, Mr. Milinkevich from Belarus, he was about to put in the prison, but just because of this international attention of the Sakharov Prize, he wasn't put there and could continue. And the same is also for the rapporteurs for the Russian Memorial's members, the Ludmila Alexeyeva, she put a part of this money away really to rent an office space for the Moscow-Helsinki group. So these are real examples where we see that this prize is not just something like a statue or just an event. It's really something much more deeper and much more valuable. So the European Parliament, of course, will continue with this. The second thing is the election observation, where the European Parliament is very active, and it sounds very general, but when we look in particular, we see that actually during the past decade there have been 100 elections monitored, and that's really something. And for example, after the last mission to Ukraine's election, the statements were very strong and also very. It's somehow the neutral information to society in the world what's happening there. Continuing on the European Parliament's activities in the human rights field, and then coming really in particular to the Eastern Partnership, of course there are two very strong bodies in the European Parliament, is the Foreign Affairs Committee and also the Subcommittee of the Human Rights, who really analyze and draft the legislation and monitor the implementation of this legislation concerning the human rights and foreign affairs in the world, and also concerning the Eastern Partnership. Another very practical tool, it's the Office for Promotion of Parliamentary Democracy, and this is something what very many new and emerging democracies they use in their work. Of course, apart from the human rights things, there are very many practical things. Colleagues already mentioned the association agreements with Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia, which will be on voting in December. So, of course, these activities they are focused on the EU in the world in general, but of course they are very much focused on the Eastern Partnership, because the EU has expanded and it's important to have security next to the borders. And I didn't mention one thing what I really wanted to tell. It's not something about the EU in general. It's also something what we do at our home. And for example, concerning the Sakarov Prize, we are really doing a lot of involving also non-Latvian speakers in Latvia in these activities. This year we had an excellent translation competition to translate the Sakharov laureate speeches, and that was done not only in Latvian but also in Russian. Last year we wanted to organize an event, the Sakharov Prize event in Maxima shopping mall in one suburb of Riga, which is very much dominated by non-Latvian speakers. Unfortunately, the tragedy in Latvia also changed our plans. But so to conclude, actually, and to answer the question, so the Eastern Partnership countries, they can rely on our advice, they can rely on financial support, they can rely on trade agreements. So the answer on the question which we have here, so the Eastern Partnership, is it a community of values or interests? And I would clearly put it that this is the community of values and interests, but they are the mutual interests. So the things, I think the things are going on very in a very qualitative way, but still not to allow Andris to ask me a question, but because this is really a very unique opportunity for us as institutions representatives here to have this really unique expertise of you all here to think, because these are the tools what we have on our table, but we have never said that this is something perfect what we have. And that's what I really would like to ask maybe the colleagues, and what should the EU institutions change in their tools concerning the Eastern Partnership countries and also the EU in the world in general? So that's my concluding remark, and more like a question to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. Yeah. Thank you for this also inclusive view, and also sort of identifying that there is a role for European Parliament to play as well in all of this and promoting some values, promoting Sakarov's ideas. So there is a lot of stakeholders actually in the process, which complicates the whole thing. But at the same time, I think it's also important in how the European Union functions. But you raised the question, and I think I am happy to throw the question actually to Fabrizio, Tassinari Institute for International Studies in Denmark. And Fabrizio, you've been as well a good colleague of ours for years, and you've been dealing with the Eastern Partnership for years as well. So I know that it's very uncomfortable, convenient task sort of to summarize and conclude, and now they provide some recommendations and suggestions, and also how we can adjust new instruments within European Union with regard to Eastern partners. So, but what Latvia can do in its presidency about Eastern Partnership? What expects us? What's realistic actually about Eastern Partnership? Please, Fabrizio, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andris, especially for putting me in this position. I was very happy to be first, now I'm last, which is... usually you say everything has already been said, but it has not been said by me, so I'm going to repeat some things. I will actually try to be a very diligent student, and I will answer the 3 questions that are put in the presentation for this panel, and I will provide one answer for each of the questions. Before that, perhaps also taking up on the question you, Andrew, just asked me, allow me to say a few words about my own perspective. And I mean, of course, interpretations about what has happened in the past year or so abound. They are all over the place, and we have heard very good exposés just before me. My own preoccupation and interest is in some of the things that I think Juris was saying before about state fragility and particularly governance. And I think this for me remains eventually the place where we can impact the most. And when I speak about governance, I speak about very basic things. I mean, the government's ability to implement policies, the quality of state services, tax collection. Just yesterday, the Transparency International released the Corruption Perception Index, and Ukraine ranks 142 out of 175 countries worldwide, between Uganda and Bangladesh, basically. And this is the things where the EU, one is almost tempted to do a sort of counterfactual history of the Ukraine crisis. If we did the things we promised to do, would we be here now talking about what we're talking about? So let me just quickly go through the 3 questions, and from this governance perspective, let me try to give my own very personal, of course, answer, or at least suggestion. So the first question is, what future developments can the EU introduce on its own side, and what can we expect from partners? Well, from this governance perspective, the rather immediate answer to that question would be, broadly speaking, bureaucratic autonomy. What is broadly known as bureaucratic autonomy, which means essentially when bureaucrats take action that politicians have to defer to, even if they don't agree, and even if other actions are taken that they don't agree. And of course, this is a big challenge, not only for Ukraine. I come from Italy. Believe me, it's a challenge there as well. But I mean, you say what can we do from Latvia? I recall some years ago reading that one of the most popular institutions in this country for some time has been the anti-corruption watchdogs, and I think that in some way is the way to go. And I mean, anything the EU might do to introduce or strengthen these kind of autonomous monitoring and supervising bodies inside Ukraine, that is where we can really make, I mean, the benefits politically eventually will be much wider. So that's my answer to the first question. The second question, I'm not sure I can answer about the Sakarov vision of values, but do they go together with the immediate needs of security and economic development? There, I think Juris had a point in saying we have to be patient, and there is also an issue of managing expectations. Of course, these reforms take time, but we should also remember that they are premised on a fundamentally different social contract. Where these reforms have worked, They are premised on a different social contract. Changing the social contract in a country like Ukraine is a generational project, if not longer. So I think on our part, when we speak, even if we speak about opening the membership perspective, which is not a subject I'm particularly keen to address, but we really need to manage expectation about what that actually ends up delivering. And then the third question, which to me is the most interesting, is what can we expect an ever greater convergence between the EU's and its eastern neighbors' visions of developments? Well, I think it's fair to say that for also unrelated events, including the Euro crisis, the idea of convergence, which is a very normative idea, has been losing steam. Just last year, the EBRD, which is an institution, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, is very invested in issues of convergence, entitled the report "Convergence at Risk," precisely because there is only so much we can imagine. But there is, however, from a governance perspective, a different way to understanding convergence, which is not between East and West, or for that matter, North and South, but it is precisely inside each country, and in this case inside Ukraine, inside Moldova, and inside any of the Southern Caucasus countries. And this other way of looking at convergence, in my view, is as much normative as the traditional EU convergence, but it's really, on the one hand, the need for a meritocratic public administration and an effective implementation, and on the other, the need for public to participate in it. And that is the convergence, I think, the EU, and in that sense also the Latvian presidency, where we can have a much more obvious and deep impact. I think I'll leave it at that. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Fabrizio, and I think you did an excellent job in complementing things, and I must apologize for moving you from the first place on the screen to the last place in the program, but I think, as I said, I think you've very well summarized and added some new aspects to this and made it even more comprehensive. But I think I should open the floor for the audience. We are running out of time. We have some 20 minutes, so let's, I guess, have some rounds of questions, since there are a number of, let's take at least 3 immediately. Let's start from this side and then we move to this one, please.
Okay,
please introduce yourself.
Yes.
And,
my name is Alexey Veselый. I'm a journalist, and I've got a question about civil society. Actually, in Russia, for example, in this program, should we start to work more with the civil society in Russian Federation? And speaking about common values, could we have some common basis between EU and Russia, speaking about Eastern Partnership? And maybe, let's say so, if we speak about problems that people are opposing European values, could we somehow reflect to the situation, and could we change it so it would be more effective and, for example, more continuing cooperating between EU and Russia, but so in the result it would be more cooperation but not more confrontation. So thank you.
okay, thank you. Let's move. Ilse was so and then we come to this side. Yes, please. No, Ilse is. Yep.
Hello, my name is Ilse Roos, and I'm Director of the European Department, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I have a question actually to those who are not from Latvia, and this question goes about cooperation between institutions. I'm also coming from Parliament, very impressed by interest from the European Parliament on this issue. But on 1st of December, Commissioner Hahn, in front of AFET committee in European Parliament, he actually said that Commission is intending to review European neighborhood policy as such. There will be some steps, as he envisaged them, which will come before Eastern Partnership Summit. And my question to those in panel are, what would you expect where this change should happen if we review European neighborhood policy, where you see the elements necessary? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes, and let's take another one from this side, and then we move to this side, please.
Tatiana Boykova, Associate Professor of Economics, Latvia. And my question for Mr. Poikāns. Speaking about the Eastern Partnership, certainly we should develop this partnership, but on the other hand, we need to take into account huge challenges that face the EU in the context of its economic, social, technological development, take into account huge problems towards income inequality. And there are many examples towards considerable disparities between old and new European countries. In order to reduce these disparities and overcome a gap, considerable gap, certainly we need to have powerful financial supporting in the long run, because in the short run it is impossible to solve these problems. And at the same time, speaking about the Eastern Partnership, this Eastern Partnership will require also financing, yeah? And moreover, this is partnership with very weak economies. And my question is, what are main strategic directions of this partnership, and what benefits will receive the EU as a global actor from this partnership with very weak economies? They have very low competitiveness. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And let's have another one here for the balance also from the right wing.
Hi, I'm Neil Melvin from Cypri in Sweden. I guess one of the criticism of the Eastern Partnership has been that it's taken place often in what seems to be a security vacuum about Russia, little thinking about what Russia would do. Now, Russia obviously has very clearly demonstrated what it will do in Ukraine, but it's not just in Ukraine. I mean, we see Russia now moving in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. We see signals that Russia is prepared to step out of the Minsk process on Karabakh. Of course, Moldova, the Gagauz issue, there's minority issues all over the place. So if we are talking about what we want to do with the Eastern Partnership, what will Russia do if we do more exactly? I think we need to think about this, because there are many options. Now, listening to President Putin's speech, State of the Nation address today, he seems to have doubled down. There's very little space for concessions. So if we upgrade Eastern Partnership, do we think he's going to roll over and surrender and say, that's it, you know, our economy's going bad, too bad you guys won? Or are we going to have other conflicts? So are we prepared to risk that? And if there are other conflicts, what are we going to do? It seems to me that this is a very important discussion that we need to have, because, of course, it's our sovereign right to decide about the Eastern Partnership, but we can't do it and not understand that others may respond to it. So what do you think about that?
Okay, excellent. And I think we should come back to our distinguished panelists. And the first one was on civil society in Russia, and Irina was or Marta as well can add, but Irina, please.
I would like really to respond to the civil society, how to engage Russian civil society, because I have recently attended the EU-Russia Civil Society Forum, and the message I got there, and I haven't previously been thinking about that we created the connections and the structure bringing together civil society of EU and Eastern Partnership. There is a structure, EU-Russia Civil Society Forum, but there is no, or the connections between Russia and civil society from the Eastern Partnership. These connections are really weak. And when the crisis broke out in Georgia, in Ukraine, there were no platform for them to speak together, to think about projects, to think about cooperation. And then I really thought, why so? Why we are not just converging to structure? EU-Russia Civil Society Forum is just a private initiative funded by Open Society, Robert Bosch Stiftung, if I'm not mistaken. Also, recently the forum was funded by the Estonian Foreign Ministry. Eastern Partnership is funded by the EU money. Why we are not maybe cooperating together? And within the structure of the Eastern Partnership, we also create a platform for cooperation with Russia, Eastern Partnership, and EU civil societies, because Russian civil society, and here I'm speaking about real people, human rights defenders, NGOs, not about gongos and those created by the state. These are our allies. These are real Europeans with whom we cooperate and whom we should really support. And one more idea is just to create within maybe the European Endowment for Democracy or the EU Eastern Partnership Civil Society Forum, Civil Society Solidarity Fund, because what we see currently, lots of Russians, they are fleeing Russia because of the political repressions, and we see lots of Russian citizens on the street of Tallinn, Prague, Berlin, and Riga, and some of them escape the long prison terms, and we see lots of people and young activists fleeing Azerbaijan and sometimes Armenia as well. So we should start thinking about that really seriously. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can just add about really that before going outside the EU borders, we should also be more active inside. And one thing what I wanted to mention also concerning the Sakharov Prize, that's the debate between the Latvian young people and, for example, the Euromaidan activists, and that's something what we should do. Apart from, of course, what we will continue to do, and we really often invite experts and just civil society from the Eastern Partnership countries to visit our EU house and to speak about these debates. But it's very important thing that we just do not look just about the borders, but also stay inside and think about also different, because we have to take into account our really divided media room in Latvia, and we should involve also the Russian-speaking people here, also explaining the values of the European Union to them, because sometimes they got a bit wrong impression.
Okay, so when I think Fabrizio and Linas on Russia still, on engagement of Russia, what are the prospects of this? Because on one hand, yes, civil society, we are hopeful, we would like to have a win-win scenario, but at the same time, as it was said, the space for some kind of maneuver and for compromise and concessions are actually very, very narrow. So how you look at this?
Would you like to answer? Do you mind, Andrea? There was also a question about the neighborhood policy review. I can take that as well later, and then I answer your question first. About your question, which was also partly Neil's question. I mean, I'm not a very great fan of John Mearsheimer that you quoted before, but I do think that if one reads that article there, you get a pretty good picture of what our room for maneuver in a situation where Putin is actually doubling down actually is. Does that mean to... Also, it depends what we mean by upgrading the Eastern Partnership. If upgrading is actually open door policy, then of course the limit for maneuver will be much more limited. If we go out and say that Ukraine should be a neutral country like Austria was during the which is one of the arguments that Mearsheimer makes, well, I'm sure that Putin will not be too bothered, but I'm not sure that, I mean, then our own interests will be a bit in danger. So I think that article ends up being very prescriptive of what our options are, and I would just recommend to read that. I don't know if you want to continue on this line or...
Linas, maybe you add.
Just a little bit about Russia. Yeah, of course, Russia will remain our neighbor, and there must be some sort of cooperation. One of the ideas which could be re-established or recreated in the agenda of cooperation is the common economic space, which was a discussion in 2003 probably, with possibilities to engage with Russia more in terms of the markets and in terms of commercial interest and trade. Obviously, it depends on one question, whether European Union maintains its principle of being the regulator, the thing that creates the rules and for competition that Russia must take and adapt. If European Union maintains that there could be possibilities for negotiation in that field.
Mm-hmm. Doris, on review of Eastern Partnership.
I think it's difficult to assess in advance what might come out of this review of the Eastern Partnership. I think one of the principal aspects is that there is the impression that the European neighborhood, as it was set up, not only the Eastern Partnership, but also to the south, which would be in the review also as a whole package, has new challenges to tackle, because when the European neighborhood was created, and also with the reassessment that went on in 2011, when, of course, the challenge was to react foremost to the Arabic Spring and what came out of it, there was this line to go in this direction, more for more, deep democracy, and the question is now what instruments are there to reach these aims that have been set. And the one is, of course, the question of financing and what has to be financed, and do the routes of financing as it is foreseen now in the different programs really work and address the right issues, go into the right direction. I think one important aspect of reviewing the European neighborhood policy is actually to strengthen the tools of the European Union at hand, or even to use it more often, to create an area of stability, of security in the neighborhood states. So I think the decision to install the mission in Ukraine now for the security mission dealing with cooperating with the OSCE and having being a civilian mission, having at its aim to strengthen the rule of law, to enhance the working of the system. I think this might be also an issue of reviewing the neighborhood policy, and probably to have an even more differentiated assessment of what is needed in the states, because we have now the separation between the south and the east, but still you have so many different challenges in the different states that you cannot address it with a single rule book, so to say. And also I think, I mean, and this is something I do not know in how far this will play a role, but having heard discussions with Johannes Hahn before, and I mean, he's Austrian, so it's also that he sees probably also a role for specific EU members in dealing with specific non-EU members. So, because there are historic ties, there are economic relations, not with the whole of the European Union, but with specific group of countries, and probably this will also be an aspect of enhancing this form of cooperation, that specific member states have a specific role in addressing issues in other countries.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, thanks. And Juris, you had the concrete question as well on strategic benefits for the EU.
Strategic benefits. Definitely there are strategic benefits. I think the key idea of creating and designing the Eastern Partnership was the creation of zone of stability and prosperity. When you have neighbors, you want to see your neighbors stable and prosperous. And we need to assist these countries in reforming themselves. If we are prepared to risk increasing cross-border crime, smuggling, migration, probably we don't need to pay any attention to the neighbors, but I think the key, this is our own stability and prosperity also when assisting these neighbors. I think second is the European Union is living in ever-globalized world, and every union or a union of the states needs allies. So Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Azerbaijan, all countries can play a very important role being EU allies on the international fora. Specifically more on the economy, I think Azerbaijan has proved itself as a reliable energy partner, and we have a couple of Eastern Partnership member states serving also as energy transitors, in this case Ukraine, Georgia, and if we want to think, let's say, about any South gas corridors, so we need Azerbaijan, Georgia on board for sure. And I think for a more, I would say, future perspective is, I always like this example of the comparison between Ukraine and Poland. When the Cold War ended, we had Poland and Ukraine very much on the same level of economic development. Now GDP per capita in Poland is 3 times bigger. If Poland was able to accomplish this path and to carry out these reforms, and now being 3 times richer than Ukraine, and if we use properly the association agreement, with Ukraine, we might have Ukraine as an increasingly important partner also for the European Union, specifically in terms of agriculture. So I see a lot of benefits at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you. Let's have another short round of questions. Catherine, yes, Jaap, please.
Okay, Jaap de Zwaan, TEPSA and Erasmus University. These are all sensitive issues, but I've always found it difficult to accept the point of departure from the EU side that, in fact, we present Eastern Partnership as an alternative for membership and not as a sort of we paving the way for your partnership. Because I think that everybody will understand that even if we would have opened up membership for these countries, well, let's say Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova, it would take decades before they would be prepared. Okay, that's one thing. So I think if we are going to revise, it would be a good idea to at least lift this obstacle. The second one is, and I think it's very interesting what you said, Doris, Wydra, about the possibility to connect member states to a certain third country in view of the needs and the capabilities. I have also sometimes in mind to try to connect these kinds of Eastern Partnership on an individual basis to several of our policies. Why not open up the possibility to connect them more to CFSP discussions or to parts of our Home Affairs cooperation? It might be a mutual interest, and to the extent that they want to participate, why should we refuse something? So sometimes I have also difficulties to accept that we have to negotiate for years about the total global package, and that has to be ratified by all the parliament and member states. Why not be a bit more practical and try to involve them on an individual basis in several of our policies?
Okay, thank you. Catherine?
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, I wanted to react also to the question of membership and give it a little bit of a different answer, because I think what really the UK needs right now is support in implementing the association agreement. It has a huge amount of reforms that have to be done, and even though we say that they might take generations, they have agreed to do very many reforms within the next 2 to 5 years. In the DCFTA, even though that has been postponed for a little while. And I think this is also a great example, the postponement of the implementation of the DCFTA in trilateral negotiations between Ukraine, the EU, and with Russia, that there is an opportunity for other politics than only the sanctions, but also for cooperation in terms of implementation of the Eastern Partnership that is agreed on by all three sides. And that, I think, holds great potential, because Ukraine will always probably have a large part of its trade with Russia. And I think this also refers to the last question of reviewing the Eastern Partnership or the neighborhood policy. I don't think necessarily that this means that it will be even going further in the integration. I think the term that is crucial here is differentiation, because I think it will mean less, not a DCFTA, but a normal free trade agreement, possibly with Azerbaijan, and even a cooperation on an even lower level with Belarus and Armenia. This, I think, would also be possible in view of Russia. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. There was still on this side, Veiko. Yeah.
Yes, Veiko Spolis, Latvian MP. Thank you for all the exposés, excellent presentations. But I'm actually looking on the name of the panel, and while we speak about Eastern Partnership as a community of value or interests, pretty much I would say it's 50-50, because it's very much influenced also by our own EU community. So therefore, looking at it from the Ukrainian war perspective, what has happened now, either Doris or Fabrizio, how do you see, are we increasingly community of values, or we are community of interests in EU, particularly looking on President in Kremlin financing Front National and other far-right parties? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ines, and then the last one over there, yeah.
Hello, thank you. Ines Sabirstein's a former Latvian MP, but a year now in Moldova working on an EU project on the Deep and Comprehensive Free Trade Agreement. Two experiences that I think, lessons learned, that I think we should focus on to help Eastern Partnership be successful. One is precisely the speaker who mentioned governance. I think reforms is a process. It's not copying the directives and putting it on paper. It's the way, the decision-making process. that it's not just technical civil servants who are knowledgeable, it's that civil society is involved, it's the way of reaching a consensus and compromise, which is not, in my perception, a basic element of some of these societies, within ministries, between ministers, between the government and parliament, with the government and parliament, with civil society and the stakeholders, because it's really, they have a long way to go. So I think if we need to focus on this to make reforms, because then you can put in the decision-making process, the reforms, and make sure that they address the needs and are adapted to what the society wants or is willing to accept. Secondly, we talk about increasing assistance. I really think it's very important that we have to have emphasis on coordinating donor assistance and coordinating assistance to help these weak public administration institutions identify what are their needs and matching that. And we are, through our project, trying to do this in Moldova, because I guess coming from Latvia in a small country, we don't have big bilateral programs, so you have to merge and piggyback what you have to make it more successful. So your thoughts on this?
Thank you. And there is still one last question at the end of the call, please.
Thank you. Dragoș Dinu, Romanian Center for European Policy. I think that I will be building a bit on the aspects that our previous discussants has raised. I think that there are two issues that we should be thinking about. One is, in what way and what are the concrete manners in which we could, as European Union, could support implementation of the aspects that were already agreed and are already included in the partnership agreement and subsequent documents. And I'm not referring only to experts and provision of technical expertise. We have literally invaded some of these countries with experts. A former Latvian minister is now high-level EU advisor in Ministry of Economy in Chisinau. A former high official in Lithuania, a Lithuanian high official, is now holding the same position in Ministry of Justice over there. We have a couple of former Romanian deputy ministers engaged in the same thing. We have numbers of projects running in parallel trying to build the administrative capacities of various structures. And this is good. We are doing this and we need to continue doing it. But I think that one challenge is to think about other manners and other ways to actually support implementation of this and reach the results. Because limiting ourselves to provision of technical assistance might not be enough. Secondly, and again I think this is for Latvian presidency, what do we give them when they reach the goals? In other words, what carrots do we use? How do we keep Europe attractive for the citizens of these countries? And I'm not referring only to the elites, but to the citizens. We need to think about what do we offer, and this brings me back to the third scenario that our Lithuanian colleague has mentioned. What do we offer them in case they are successful? Thank you.
Thank you. And so since time is really running fast, very fast, too fast, I'm bringing back those questions to the panelists, but please, half a minute each. Just address one issue, and it would be good that if you address this one issue in the context of Latvia and EU presidency. And let's start in reverse order so that Fabrizio will not blame me later on just not giving him also the sometimes
finally,
first line.
excellent.
Please.
Thank you. I'm glad. So half a minute. On the EMP review, I think the points that both Doris and Jaap made about, let's call it variable geometry, I think is a very safe one. Strategically, I mean, the question was, what would you expect to happen? I can tell you what I hope to happen, that they ditched the name neighborhood policy and they call it European integration policy in the East. That would be my suggestion for the Latvian presidency. Mm-hmm. But then in terms of implementation, variable geometries, I happened to be involved years ago in a policy called Black Sea Synergy, and I think that's something that could be revised because the experience in this part of the world, in the Baltic Sea region, in the 90s was actually very positive, especially in terms of variable geometries involving countries that have a strategic interest close by. So that would be the first answer. The gentleman about what has the crisis taught us in relation to values or interests, of course it's not in opposition. I can tell you, I've been spending this whole time of the Ukraine crisis in Berlin, and I've never experienced such a deep debate about values and interests. So if my answer to your question is that, if anything, we've become a political community in the deep sense of the word, because we debate issues of order in Europe in ways that we didn't before. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so Linas.
Very shortly, I think that the European Union should not feel threatened or abused by Russia's actions, because even Yanukovych, who was pro-Russian president, was one step away from signing an association agreement, so Russia's toolbox is quite limited to stop the development of these countries in the right direction. But even small steps in the right direction can be very effective, and I think Latvian presidency will play a big part, because many countries in the European Union are not sure where the European neighborhood or where Eastern Partnership policy should move. So I think that Latvians must be the initiatives to move it to the right direction, and the right direction is moved to the membership perspective, whether now, whether in 5 years, but in that direction.
Doris.
Okay, I'll be very short. I would also like to stress the membership perspective. I think this is a crucial factor also for making conditionality work. So conditionality works only if you have the right incentives in place. And of course, it's not of becoming a member in a given time frame, but as a kind of carrot, which was mentioned. So if all the necessary requirements, and I think the European Union should be very careful about the requirements the countries should have to fulfill. So no premature membership, but the membership as a perspective. The community of values or interests as a second point. I think, of course, interests have in many cases trumped the values of the European Union. But I think what the conflict in Ukraine and in all the neighborhood has made clear is that the values have real importance for the European integration project and for the neighborhood, and that this is the strength of the European actually. So I think now it becomes more clear what position these values also hold in relation to the interests of single member states.
Excellent, thank you. Juris.
I think we are entering, I would call it a very boring period of the implementation of association agreements, and it will take many, many years. And I think if these agreements are properly implemented, I believe that we can look for further ways of cooperation, because there is a Council decision that the EU-Ukraine association agreement doesn't constitute the final goal in cooperation between Ukraine and the European Union. It naturally applies to both, to Moldova and Georgia. But I think what the key we will get during the next 3 years is hard work in implementing these agreements.
Thank you. Irina?
I would like to have a short comment on Ines' remark about the cooperation in providing development assistance to our neighborhood. I'm working for the foundations, and we do share information within our network open society, but I have no idea what others are really doing. And this is a huge possibility of misusing the funds. So we potentially might fund one association which is not delivering. And then it would be it would be my dream that one of those European players, whether it be European development of democracy or anything else, to introduce the intranet of this development assistance to our neighborhood, so we are all aware who is doing what, and that's my point.
Thank you. And Marta?
I really like the focus on implementation in the panel and also in the audience. And the very practical thing what we, the office, is going to do in the next January or February, it's the practical education of business in Latvia, the Ukrainian business in Latvia, and also the Ukrainian business and civil society about the free trade agreement. Because I really believe that when the welfare increases and when the situation improves, also it's easier to defend the values. Thank you.
Excellent. So just very shortly to conclude, just some catchwords or catchphrases. I think we have a lot of challenges, and one which was echoed here around the table, fragility of the states in Eastern Partnership, and I think also fragility of social contracts. Usually I say that we should do homeworks, but I think this time actually we also expect from Eastern partners they're doing the homeworks as well. And of course we should provide incentives, we should be patient, even though to re-paraphrase Hillary Clinton, the patience is not a substitute for the policy, but then you might say that boring implementation of association agreement is a policy. So thanks to the panelists, and please join me a round of applause.